My son ignored me for 10 years until he found out how much I made from selling my shop. Then one bright Thursday morning, he showed up at my door with his wife and 3 suitcases. "As your son," he said, barely off the porch, "I'm entitled to some of this, Mom. We're moving in. You've got all this extra space anyway." I just stood there, staring at him, the boy I'd raised, now a grown man with nerves strong enough to call greed a right. The audacity hit me like a slap. Frank Davis, my only child, looked me square in the eye like he was doing me a favor by taking over my house. And beside him stood Stephanie, chin lifted, phone in hand, acting like she was checking into a hotel. 10 years of silence. And this was his grand return speech. If you're watching this, take a second to breathe that in. Because when your own child treats your home like a prize to be claimed, something inside you either breaks or hardens. Mine hardened. I smiled. The same smile I used to give rude customers who thought they could talk me into free alterations. "Come in," I said softly. "You've come a long way." They dragged their bags over the threshold like conquerors. Stephanie's eyes swept across my living room. The curtains I'd sewn myself, the framed photos, the faint scent of lemon oil. "This place could really use some modern touches," she muttered. I bit the inside of my cheek to keep from laughing. I could tell she already saw herself redecorating with my money. Now, before I tell you what happened next, I should probably explain how we got here. How my son, who hadn't spent a Christmas, a birthday, or even a 5-minute phone call with me in a decade, suddenly remembered I existed the moment he learned I'd come into money. But some moments deserve to be savored, because what I did next, I should have done a long time ago. The truth is, I sold my small sewing shop last fall, Ruby Stitch and Thread. I'd open it when Frank was just a boy, and for 40 years it kept a roof over our heads and my dignity intact. When my late husband passed, that shop was my lifeline. So when a young woman offered to buy it and keep the name, I took the deal. Between the sale, my savings, and Earl's pension, I finally had what I'd never had before, breathing room. Apparently, breathing room smells like opportunity to some folks. Frank hadn't asked how I'd been, hadn't mentioned his father, hadn't even asked about the old dog he used to love. No, he started right in about square footage and family helping family. "We figured it's better for everyone," he said, setting his fancy duffel bag on my rug. "You won't be so lonely, and we won't have to waste money on rent. You don't even use half this house." Stephanie nodded, crossing her arms. "It's kind of selfish. Honestly, living in all this space by yourself when your own son's struggling." I felt my pulse steady, slow, deliberate. I'd seen this before. Not from him, but from people who thought kindness was weakness. It's the same tone customers used when they'd say, "You're charging that much for hemming?" I walked past them into the kitchen. "Coffee's on," I said, like they were guests, because that's all they were. I poured 3 cups and sat across from them at my table, the same table Frank had eaten at for 18 years, back when he still knew how to say thank you. "So," I said, "what exactly are you asking me for?" Frank gave a little laugh, like it was all obvious. "Mom, we're not asking. We're family. We'll help around the house, maybe handle bills, whatever you need. You've done your part. It's our turn now." He leaned back like a man presenting a business deal. Stephanie added, "We were thinking we could take the upstairs rooms, make it our space. I can even redecorate for you." For me, I stared at them both. I should have been furious, but I wasn't. I was almost impressed. The entitlement was polished, like they'd practiced this in the car. I sipped my coffee. "You've got it all figured out, don't you?" Frank nodded. "We just want what's fair, Mom. You've got more than you'll ever need. We're just trying to build something." I let his words hang there. Fair. That word can mean 100 different things depending on who's talking. "I see," I said finally. You're right, you should build something. Everyone should. He smiled, thinking I was agreeing. Stephanie whispered, "See, I told you she'd understand." But inside, my mind was turning like clockwork. I knew something they didn't. You don't have to raise your voice to take back your power. Sometimes you just have to sit still long enough for people to show you exactly who they are. I gathered the empty cups, stood up, and set them by the sink. "Let me think this over," I said. "It's a lot to take in." Frank grinned. "Of course, Mom. No rush. We can start moving things upstairs in the meantime." He really said that, in the meantime. I turned back, my hand resting on the counter, and gave that small smile again. "Make yourselves comfortable," I said. "I'll put on another pot." They headed down the hall, suitcases bumping against the wall, already arguing about who'd get which room. I stayed where I was, watching the steam rise from the coffee pot. My pulse had slowed to a steady calm. This wasn't rage, it was clarity. Because when people show up thinking they can rewrite the rules of your life, the smartest thing you can do is let them talk. They'll hang themselves with their own words soon enough. I poured myself one more cup and whispered. I put on a pot of coffee and decided to listen first. That's where they always hang themselves. After they disappeared down the hallway, I sat there with my coffee and let the quiet fill the house. It had been years since another voice echoed through these walls, and now it sounded foreign. I thought about how long it had been since Frank last stood under this roof. 10 years. A whole decade of silence, broken only by a few short texts and one awkward Christmas card that arrived 2 months late. The truth is, I lost my son the day he married Stephanie. She never liked me, not even from the start. She said I worried too much about Frank's spending, called me old-fashioned, said I made him feel small. What she really meant was that I didn't hand over money easily. I came from a time when you earned what you wanted, when you saved until you could pay cash, and when you fixed things instead of replacing them. That didn't sit well with her. When they first got married, I tried my best to make her feel welcome. I gave them my mother's dining set, the one I'd been saving for Frank since he was a teenager. I sent birthday cards every year, each one with a little check inside. Nothing big, just a sign I was thinking of them. I'd never hear back. No thank you, no call, no message. After the 5th year of silence, I stopped sending the checks. The next year, they didn't even send a card. I remember one time early on, they invited me to dinner at their apartment in Nashville. I baked a pie, drove 2 hours, and when I got there, Stephanie barely looked up from her phone. She spent the night talking about her new friends, her new car, and her new plans. When I offered to help with a few bills, quietly without pride, she laughed and said, "We don't need charity, Ruby." That was the last dinner we had together. When Frank called 6 months later, it wasn't to check in. He wanted to borrow money for a business idea. I told him I couldn't help him that time. He said he understood, but the tone in his voice changed. It was short, clipped, almost cold. After that, he stopped calling altogether. At first, I blamed myself. Maybe I was too hard on him. Maybe I should have given him what he asked for, even if it didn't make sense. But after a while, I realized the distance wasn't about me, it was about money and how differently we saw it. I worked for every dollar I had. He always expected things to come easy. That little sewing shop of mine, Ruby Stitch and Thread, kept food on our table when Earl passed. It wasn't fancy, but it was steady. The place smelled of fabric and coffee, and the sound of old friends catching up while I mended their clothes. I fixed uniforms for the high school band, church dresses, and wedding gowns. Sometimes I'd stay late just to finish a hem for a young bride who couldn't afford the rush fee. People around town would say, "Ruby, you're too kind. You'll never make a fortune giving away your time like that." Maybe they were right, but it wasn't about fortune. It was about pride, and it was about doing something honest with my hands. The years went by, one stitch at a time. I kept that shop open through recessions, floods, and long nights. Then last year, a young woman named Nicole walked in and asked if I'd ever thought about retiring. She said she'd love to buy the shop and keep it running. At first, I laughed. I couldn't imagine not working. But the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. My knees ached, my eyes tired quicker, and the idea of quiet mornings at home started to sound nice. Nicole made me a fair offer, more than I expected. Honestly, between that sale and Earl's pension settlement finally clearing, I had enough to take care of myself for the rest of my life. I paid off every bill, fixed up the house, replaced the old roof, and put the rest into savings. Nothing wild. No big splurges. Just security. I didn't tell many people. Cedar Hill's a small town, and gossip spreads faster than good news. But somehow word got out. Maybe through the bank, maybe through an old neighbor. And that's how Frank must have found out. Looking back now, I should have known something was coming the moment he called me last month. It was the first time I'd heard his voice in years. He didn't say much, just, "How've you been, Mom?" I remember smiling after we hung up, thinking maybe he missed me. Foolish, I know. Now, sitting there with his bags in my hallway, it all made sense. He hadn't missed me. He'd missed what I could give him. Stephanie had always said I was tight with money. She'd sneer whenever she saw me reuse a jar or fix an old lamp instead of buying a new one. "You don't enjoy life," she used to say. But she didn't understand. Enjoying life isn't about buying everything you see. It's about sleeping soundly at night, knowing the lights will stay on. 10 years of quiet, 10 years of being forgotten. Then, suddenly, I'm worth a visit. I stared down the hallway where they'd gone to unpack. Their voices carried softly, laughing, talking about which room had the better light. They sounded like two people making plans for a vacation home they didn't pay for. I should have been angry, but what I felt was something colder, realization. They didn't come for me. They came for what they thought belonged to them, and I'd let them believe it, at least for now. Because sometimes letting people show their hand is the best way to know what game they're playing. I rinsed my coffee cup, wiped the counter, and looked around the kitchen I'd built with my own hands. Every cabinet, every tile, every penny that paid for it, all earned the hard way. I never thought money would bring my son back, but I should have known better. The next morning started like most of mine do. I was up by 7, made coffee, fed the dog, and opened the blinds to let in the Tennessee sunlight. For a brief moment, it almost felt normal again until I heard voices coming from the kitchen. Frank and Stephanie were already up. They'd helped themselves to cereal, eggs, and the last of my bacon. Frank looked perfectly at home, barefoot, flipping through my morning paper like he'd been doing it for years. "Morning, Mom," he said, cheerful as ever. "You sleep all right?" I nodded, even though I hadn't. "Fine," I said. "You two make yourselves comfortable." Stephanie smiled over her coffee. "Oh, yes. The guest room's lovely. I might change the curtains later, though the color's kind of dull." I just smiled. "That's fine, honey. They've been hanging there since before you met Frank." She blinked, not sure how to take that. Frank folded the newspaper and leaned on the table. "Mom, I've got to say, you've done real well for yourself. This place looks great. You must feel good finally having a cushion." A cushion. That was how he described 40 years of hard work, like it was some spare change I'd found in the couch. "I do," I said quietly. "It's nice not worrying about bills for once." He nodded. "You deserve it. Really. We're proud of you." Something in his tone made me look up. Proud didn't sound sincere. It sounded like a setup. I'd heard that tone from salesmen before they try to upsell you on a warranty you don't need. Stephanie jumped in. "You know, family should always help each other. We've been trying to get back on our feet, but with rent these days, it's impossible. The landlord raised it again, and with the car payment, we're barely keeping our heads above water. Frank added quickly, we've been talking about starting something, maybe a small family business. I've got experience in sales, and Steph knows marketing. If we had just a little seed money, we could make it happen. There it was. The just a little that always turns into a lot. I sipped my coffee and let them keep talking. Stephanie leaned forward, eyes bright. We don't want a handout. We just thought, since you've had your turn, maybe it's time to help us have ours. You've got more than you need, right? She said it like it was simple math. Frank nodded. Exactly. We could all benefit. You wouldn't have to worry about anything. We'd be here to help you, and you'd be part of something bigger. I looked at him across the table and realized this wasn't a conversation about family. It was a pitch. My son was selling me on the idea of turning my retirement into his investment fund. Tell me more about this business, I said. Frank smiled like a man who thought he'd won. Well, we've been thinking of opening a boutique. Stephanie's always had great taste. We could call it the Davis Touch. We'd sell clothes, accessories, maybe some home decor. Modern stuff. Stephanie nodded eagerly. I'd handle the creative side. Frank would manage the front end, and you could be the financial partner. We'd make you a co-owner, of course. Co-owner. That was the word they used to dress up what they really meant. Bankroller. I stirred my coffee slowly, watching the sugar swirl at the bottom of the cup. I'd learned long ago that silence makes people nervous, and nervous people reveal more than they plan to. Frank filled the quiet. We could even use part of your garage as a workspace. It's just sitting there empty. You'd still live here, obviously, but we'd help keep the place up. Win-win. I nodded, pretending to think it over. And how much were you thinking of needing to start? Stephanie hesitated, glancing at Frank. Not much, she said. Just enough for inventory, maybe a lease later. Maybe 50 or 60,000 to start. She said it like she was asking for a cup of sugar. I couldn't help but smile. That's quite a bit for not much. Stephanie laughed lightly. Well, you can't make money without spending some. You'd get it back. We'd make sure of it. I looked down at my coffee cup, then back up at them. You two really have it all planned out. Frank grinned, completely missing the sarcasm. We've been thinking about it for months. We just didn't want to tell you until it felt real. It's time we all work together. That's what families do, right? I thought about that word again, family. When Frank was little, family meant Sunday dinners and late-night talks when he couldn't sleep. It meant sharing what we had, not demanding more than was fair. Now it was a word used to make me feel guilty for having something they didn't earn. I let out a slow breath. You've been busy, I said, but tell me, why didn't you call me sooner if you'd been thinking about this for months? Frank's smile faltered for just a second. We didn't want to bother you until we had a plan. I nodded again. And you only found out about me selling the shop recently? Stephanie spoke up too fast. A friend mentioned it. Small towns, word gets around. So they hadn't just stopped by. They'd been tracking my life like investors checking on a stock. I stood up and carried my cup to the sink. I could feel their eyes following me. I didn't turn around right away. I just looked out the window at my small backyard, the one Earl and I built with our hands. Every board on that deck, every flower in those pots, paid for with years of honest work. When I turned back, I saw their suitcases stacked neatly by the hallway door. The same bags they'd brought in yesterday, lined up like a promise they had no intention of breaking. And that's when it hit me. They hadn't come to ask for help. They'd come to move in. Frank must have seen the look on my face because he jumped in again. Mom, you don't need to decide now. We can ease into it. We'll help around here while we get things rolling. It'll all balance out. Stephanie nodded. Exactly. Think of it as a partnership. I looked at the two of them, my son, who used to hold my hand crossing the street, and his wife, who could barely hide her impatience. They were smiling, waiting for my approval, thinking they were being reasonable. But I wasn't fooled. They weren't asking for help. They were demanding a merger. After they finished their little sales pitch, I told them I needed to rest. I went to my room, closed the door, and sat on the edge of my bed for a long time. I didn't feel angry yet, just tired. Tired of being seen as a safety net instead of a mother. Tired of people thinking I got lucky when all I ever did was work hard. I looked at the framed photo of Earl on my nightstand. His smile was as steady as it had always been, that kind of smile that told you everything would be all right if you just kept your head down and did what was right. I whispered, "You'd know what to say to him, wouldn't you?" Earl had been gone for 15 years, but I still heard his voice sometimes when things got hard. We'd started with nothing, a beat-up pickup, a rented house, and a dream that one day we wouldn't have to owe anyone anything. That dream came true, but not because of luck. When he passed, I had $2,000 in the bank and a mountain of bills. The only thing I owned outright was my sewing machine and the tiny building on Main Street where Ruby Stitch and Thread sat. I thought about selling it, but something in me said no. That shop was my last tie to the life we built. So I rolled up my sleeves and got to work. Those first years were tough. I took every job that came through the door. Hemming pants for farmers, fixing work uniforms for the grocery store, patching holes in church choir robes. I charged fair, but I didn't gouge anyone. Folks appreciated that. And word spread. I remember the first winter after Earl died. The old heater broke, and I had to run the shop with a small space heater under my table. My fingers went numb some mornings, but I still finished every order on time. People started bringing me hot coffee just to keep me going. That's what small towns do. They look out for you when you're not too proud to keep showing up. After a while, I learned more than just sewing. I learned business. I learned how to keep the books straight, how to file taxes, how to reorder inventory before the shelves went bare. I kept a ledger with every penny marked. Fabric costs, zippers, thread, electricity, rent. No fancy computer program, just a notebook, a calculator, and a pencil. When the chain stores moved in, folks said I wouldn't last. But people still came to me because they knew I'd treat their clothes like they were my own. You can't buy that kind of trust. Frank never understood that part. As a kid, he'd complain that I worked too much. He'd say, "Mom, you're always tired," and I'd tell him that's what it takes. When he got older, he called me old-fashioned, said I needed to think bigger. He wanted easy money, fast money. He didn't care if it came with strings attached. I cared more about keeping the lights on. By the time I sold the shop, I'd earned every wrinkle on my hands and every gray hair on my head. I didn't sell because I was tired of working. I sold because I'd finally earned my rest. Nicole, the young woman who bought it, reminded me of myself at her age. Determined, polite, careful with her words. She said, "Miss Davis, you've built something special here. I'd like to carry it forward." I believed her. The sale wasn't some lottery win. It was the result of 40 years of showing up, rain, shine, and heartbreak. When that check cleared, I didn't run out to buy new furniture or fancy clothes. I paid off the last bit of debt, fixed the leaky roof, and put the rest in savings. I even kept a separate emergency fund because I knew life has a way of testing you when you least expect it. Earl used to say, "It's not how much you make, Ruby. It's how long you can sleep when the world gets loud." He was right. Frank saw money as a prize. I saw it as protection. That's where we were different. He wanted to show it. I wanted to keep it safe. Sitting there in my room, I thought about how proud I used to be watching him grow up. He was smart, funny, full of promise. Somewhere along the way, he started believing that money was love and success was measured by what you could show off. Maybe Stephanie encouraged that. Maybe she just saw opportunity. Either way, I'd raised him better than that. I thought about the people in town who'd supported me all those years, the retired teacher who always paid a little extra for your trouble, the farmer who brought eggs every Friday as thanks, the church ladies who trusted me with their best dresses. Those were my people. We never had much, but we had enough. That's what Frank never understood. Enough is a blessing, not a limitation. I stood up and looked around my bedroom. The curtains I'd sewn years ago still hung perfectly. My dresser wasn't new, but it was solid. Every piece of furniture had a story, every picture on the wall a memory. I thought about Stephanie's earlier comment, how my curtains were dull. Maybe to her they were, but to me, they were a reminder that I'd made a life with my own two hands. People like her think kindness is weakness. They think if you don't fight back right away, you must be scared. But I'd learned long ago that silence can be stronger than shouting. You don't have to raise your voice to stand your ground. I sat back down on the edge of the bed and smiled to myself. They thought they were clever, trying to butter me up before asking for money. But they didn't realize I'd spent decades listening to people's stories, reading their faces, their tone, their body language. When you work with folks that long, you learn to see the truth between their words. And the truth was clear as daylight. They weren't here out of love. They were here because they saw a door they thought they could walk through. I had a feeling that door was about to close, because I've stitched enough torn seams to know when something's about to rip. By the third day, I had learned their rhythm. They slept in late, used my kitchen like it was theirs, and talked big plans over my breakfast table. The first 2 mornings, I'd let them chatter while I kept quiet. But on the third morning, I knew the real talk was coming. Frank walked in dressed too nicely for someone who had nowhere to go. He wore that pressed shirt he probably couldn't afford to dry clean. Stephanie followed close behind, carrying her tablet like she was walking into a board meeting. I could tell by the way she straightened her shoulders that this wasn't a casual chat. They'd rehearsed whatever was coming. "Mom," Frank started, giving me that smile people use when they're about to ask for something. "Can we sit for a second?" I nodded and poured myself coffee. "Sure. What's on your mind?" They sat across from me. Frank leaned in, elbows on the table. We've been thinking. You've worked so hard all your life, and you finally have enough to relax. That's something to be proud of." Stephanie jumped right in. "It's inspiring, really. We've been struggling with bills and rent, and we realized something. Family should help family. It's what good families do." I didn't answer. I just looked at them and let them fill the silence. People get nervous when you don't talk. Frank kept going. "We're your only family, Mom. There's no one else. It's not like you have grandkids to save for or anyone else depending on you. You've got all this money sitting in your account, and we're out here drowning. It doesn't seem right." Stephanie nodded. "Exactly. It's kind of unfair when you think about it. So many older people just sit on money they'll never spend. Meanwhile, the next generation can't catch a break." I stirred my coffee slowly, feeling the spoon hit the sides of the cup. "Unfair, huh?" Frank rushed to soften it. "We don't mean that in a bad way. We're just saying we're family. If you helped us out now, it'd be like an investment in your future too. You'd be helping us build something lasting." Stephanie smiled like she was pitching a product. "We're not asking for a handout. We just think it's time you share what you've earned. You've done your part. Let us do ours with your help." Her tone was smooth, like she'd practiced in front of a mirror. Every word rolled out rehearsed, like they'd gone over it together in the car, before walking in. I took a long sip of coffee. "And what exactly are you asking for?" Frank cleared his throat. We think 50,000 would get us started. Maybe more down the line, once we're profitable. We pay you back eventually, of course. I nearly smiled, but I kept my face calm. Eventually, he nodded. Yeah, when the business takes off. And while we're getting settled, we could stay here, save money on rent, help you around the house, make sure you're comfortable. Be here for you. Stephanie added quickly, it's not like you're getting any younger. Wouldn't it be nice to have family nearby? The way she said it made it sound more like a threat than comfort. I leaned back in my chair. So let me get this straight. You too want to move in, use my home as your base, and take $50,000 out of my savings for a business you haven't even started. Frank frowned. When you say it like that, it sounds bad. But this is about family, Mom. We're not strangers. I set my cup down gently. You felt like strangers for 10 years. That hit him. He looked down, rubbed the back of his neck. Stephanie tried to smooth it over. We didn't mean to stay away that long. Life just got busy. We always figured you were fine. I said, still am. There was a moment of silence, just the clock ticking on the wall. I looked at my son, really looked at him. He wasn't nervous. He wasn't ashamed. He believed every word he'd said. I realized then that this wasn't about need. It was about entitlement. Somewhere along the line, Frank stopped seeing me as his mother and started seeing me as an open account. I wasn't angry yet. I was studying them, their tone, their choice of words, their expressions. Everything about them screamed calculation. When Stephanie spoke again, her voice was lighter, almost condescending. You worked your whole life, Mrs. Davis. Don't you think it's time someone else takes care of you? I gave her a thin smile. Oh, I can take care of myself just fine. Frank sighed. Mom, we're not trying to fight. We're trying to build something together. It's not right that you're living like this while we're barely scraping by. You could change our lives with one decision. That's true, I said quietly. I could. His eyes lit up. So you'll help us? I stood up and began clearing the table. I didn't say that. Stephanie let out a short laugh. You don't have to think about it. We already have ideas. I can draw up a proposal tonight. I shook my head slowly. No, you don't need to do that. I've heard enough for now. Frank frowned. Mom, we're just trying to include you. This is for all of us. I turned toward him. It doesn't feel like inclusion, Frank. It feels like pressure. He blinked. Pressure? We're your family. We shouldn't have to beg. No, I said, you shouldn't. The room went quiet again. Stephanie crossed her arms. Frank shifted in his seat. The air felt heavy, thick with everything they weren't saying. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't tell them to leave. I just dried my hands on a towel and said, excuse me for a moment. I need to grab something from my room. They nodded, thinking I was just stepping away to calm down. But I wasn't calming down. I was preparing. I walked down the hall, past their neatly stacked suitcases, and into my room. I opened the bottom drawer of my dresser and pulled out a brown folder. Inside were all the things they didn't know I had, my bank statements, the sale papers from the shop, and a few other records I kept for my own peace of mind. I looked through each page carefully, then closed the folder and held it to my chest. If they wanted to talk about fairness, fine. If they wanted to talk about money, fine. But this time, the numbers would tell the truth. Because if they wanted numbers, I had plenty. When I walked back into that kitchen, I carried the brown folder under my arm. It wasn't thick, but it held everything I needed. Frank and Stephanie were still at the table, whispering. I could tell by the way they stopped mid-sentence that they were talking about me. I sat down, placed the folder on the table, and folded my hands on top of it. All right, I said. You two wanted to talk about family and money. Let's do that properly. Frank tried to smile. Mom, there's no need for... There's every need. I interrupted. My tone wasn't sharp, just steady. Because before I hand over a single dollar, I need to understand what exactly I'd be investing in. Stephanie's confidence started to slip. She shifted in her seat. We already explained, Mrs. Davis. We're starting a small business. We just need. I raised my hand gently. I heard that part. What I haven't heard is what you plan to do about the debts you already owe. Frank blinked. What debts? I opened the folder and slid a few papers toward him. The 2 personal loans you co-signed last year. The one for $12,000 that's already in collections, and the other for $5,000 that's overdue by 3 months. Oh, and the car loan that's been deferred twice. His face went pale. Stephanie looked like she'd seen a ghost. Mom, how do you even know about that? He stammered. I leaned back, calm as a preacher on Sunday. Cedar Hill's a small town. People talk. And sometimes they talk to me. Mr. Lewis at the bank mentioned it in passing when I was closing out a CD. He didn't break any laws, just said your name came across his desk. I asked a few questions. Turns out my son and his wife had been playing musical chairs with lenders. Stephanie jumped in fast. That's private. You shouldn't be prying into our business. I looked her straight in the eye. You made it my business when you sat in my kitchen asking for $50,000. Frank rubbed his temples. Mom, it's not as bad as it looks. We just hit a rough patch, that's all. It's always a rough patch, I said quietly, until the house collapses. I pulled out another paper and slid it forward. And then there's the IRS notice. 2 years of unfiled taxes. You might want to take care of that before opening a family business. Stephanie's jaw tightened. That's not your concern. Oh, but it is, I replied. Because if you thought I didn't know how to check a credit report, you don't know your mother at all. I watched the color drain from her face. For the first time since they'd arrived, she didn't have a comeback. Frank looked defeated. So, what, you dug up dirt on us just to embarrass us? I shook my head. No, Frank, I wanted to remind you that money doesn't erase bad habits. You don't fix problems by hiding from them or dumping them on someone else. I learned that the hard way after your father died. He opened his mouth to argue, but I kept going. You came here thinking I'd just write a check, no questions asked. You didn't think for a second about what that says about you, about the man I raised. That hurts more than anything else. Stephanie tried again, softer this time. We just thought maybe you'd want to help. You have so much, and we're struggling. We thought it was fair. Fair, I repeated. You know what's fair? Paying your bills, keeping your word, living within your means. That's fair. She crossed her arms, eyes rolling. You don't understand what it's like out there now. Everything's expensive. People your age don't get it. I smiled faintly. I understand better than you think. I lived through times when we had beans 3 nights a week. We didn't complain. We made do. We didn't buy what we couldn't afford. And we sure didn't knock on someone else's door demanding their hard-earned money. Frank sighed. Mom, you're being dramatic. We're not trying to take advantage. We just need a little boost. You could change everything for us. Maybe I could, I said, but I won't. His head snapped up. What? I reached into the folder again and took out one last paper, my own budget sheet. See this? This is how I live. Every dollar has a place. I pay my taxes, my insurance, my tithe, and my savings. What's left goes to the house, groceries, and a little cushion for emergencies. I didn't build that cushion for someone else's lifestyle. He frowned. We're not living some crazy lifestyle. I raised an eyebrow. You drove up here in a new SUV with leather seats and designer luggage. If that's struggling, I'd hate to see what success looks like. For a moment, no one spoke. I let the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable. Then I gathered the papers and tucked them back into the folder. You two need to face your own mess. I said, you don't need my money. You need responsibility. Stephanie muttered under her breath, this is ridiculous. I caught it, but ignored it. Here's what's going to happen. I continued. You'll stay one more night. Tomorrow morning, you'll pack your things and head back to Nashville. I'll even give you a tank of gas and some grocery money. But that's it. The rest you'll earn. Frank looked stunned. You're serious? As a heart attack, I said. He slammed his hand on the table. After everything we've been through, you turn your back on your only son? I met his eyes steady and clear. I'm not turning my back. Frank, I'm turning you around, toward the mirror. He stood up, pacing. This is unbelievable. No, I said calmly. What's unbelievable is showing up after 10 years of silence with a business plan and a bill. You should have called your mother, not your bank. For a long minute, the only sound in the room was the hum of the refrigerator. Then Frank sat back down, defeated. Stephanie stayed quiet, her eyes darting between us. Finally, Frank asked, so what are you saying, Mom? I placed the folder back under my arm and stood up. I'm saying I'm not your bailout plan. I carried the folder to my room, set it down, and breathed until my hands steadied. Then I walked back to the kitchen and sat across from them like we were starting fresh. All right, I said. You want help? Here are my terms. Frank straightened. Stephanie crossed her arms. You will pay your past due bills before you ask me for anything, I said. Every dollar in collections, every missed payment. Start there. Frank frowned. With what money? Work money, I said. Sell what you don't need. Cut what you can't afford. Call each creditor and set a plan in writing. Then bring me proof. Stephanie laughed without humor. So, you want us to struggle? You'd rather watch your own family sink. I'd rather see my family learn. I let that settle. Then I laid out the rest. Here's the only assistance I'll offer. Pay off one bill on your own, any one, and bring me the receipt. I will match that payment once, not twice, not monthly, once. That's your test of responsibility. If you can't do that, you can't run a business with other people's money. Frank rubbed his face. Mom, that's nothing. We're drowning. You're drowning because you keep jumping into deeper water. I said, you want a rope and a raft and a rescue boat. I'm giving you swimming lessons. Stephanie shook her head. This is petty. You have plenty. You could change everything for us today. I won't buy you a habit, I said, and I won't finance pride. Frank pushed back from the table. You don't understand. The landlord raised our rent again. My hours got cut. We're stuck. Then downsize, I said. Move to a cheaper place. Sell the SUV. Take a second job until you're stable. Plenty of people do it. It isn't shameful. He stared like I was speaking a foreign language. We can't just start over. You already are, I said. The question is whether you do it honestly. Stephanie rolled her eyes. You're just being difficult because you're mad we showed up. I'm not mad you showed up, I said. I'm disappointed you showed up with expectations instead of humility. Frank asked, so if we pay one bill and bring a receipt, you'll match it. Then what? Then you keep going, I said. You build momentum. You file your taxes. You call the IRS and set a plan. You stop pretending a business will fix what discipline won't. He sank back quiet. I slid a small envelope across the table. There's $200 for gas and groceries to get you home and through the week. It's not a gift, it's a start. Consider it seed money for effort, not excuses. Stephanie peeked inside. 200? That's it. That's it, I said. Frank stood so fast his chair scraped. This is unbelievable. What's unbelievable, I said, is asking for $50,000 with no plan for the debts you already owe. What's unbelievable is calling pressure family and calling boundaries cruel. He paced to the window and back. You're choosing money over your son. I'm choosing integrity for my son. I said, if I give you what you want today, I take away the very thing you need, self-respect. So that's it. We pack and leave. You'll stay tonight, and you'll leave in the morning, I said. If you decide to pay a bill next week and bring the receipt, we'll talk. If not, I wish you well. Stephanie muttered. Ungrateful old women always think they know best. I know my balance, my boundaries, and my worth, I said. Frank grabbed his keys. I'm going for a drive. Take a breath, I said. Decide who you want to be when you come back. The door closed hard. The house settled. Stephanie sat tapping her nails on the table. She pointed at the folder. You saved all that paperwork just so you could play sheriff. I saved it so I'd never be confused, I said. Clarity keeps people honest. She stood, chin high. You'll regret this when you're alone and need us. I'm alone now, I said, and I'm doing fine. She scoffed and went down the hall. The guest room door clicked shut. I washed the cups and wiped the counter. Work steadies a person. Frank didn't come back for 2 hours. When he did, the pushy shine was gone. He leaned against the doorway. You really won't help us beyond that. I already did, I said. I told you the truth. He nodded. We'll head out in the morning. All right, I said. I'll make coffee before you go. He stood there like he wanted to say something else, then walked away. I slept well, not because I'd won, but because I hadn't lost myself. In the morning, I made eggs and toast and packed a small bag with snacks. I set it by the door next to their suitcases. Frank carried the bag to the car. Stephanie tucked the envelope deeper into her purse. At the steps, he turned. If we bring a receipt, you'll match it? Once, I said. Only once. He nodded. Okay. They got in the car. The engine started. They didn't wave. They pulled away like the driveway owed them a smooth exit. I stayed on the porch until the street was quiet again. The dog lay at my feet with a little sigh. Inside, I poured fresh coffee and sat at the same table where they'd made their case. Sunlight slid across the wood. The house felt like itself again. Solid, simple, mine at last. Steady. The quiet after they left was worth more than any check I could have written. A week passed before I heard from Frank again. The house had settled back into its quiet rhythm. Just me, the dog, and the sound of the wind brushing through the old oak outside. I thought, maybe that would be the end of it. Maybe they'd drive back to Nashville, realize I was serious, and start over. Then the phone rang. It was late afternoon. I saw his name on the caller ID, and for a moment considered letting it ring. But a mother's heart doesn't stop caring, even when it's been bruised. So I picked up. Mom. His voice was softer this time. No edge, no confidence. Just worn down. Yes, Frank. There was a pause. I could hear traffic in the background, and Stephanie's voice somewhere off to the side, sharp and impatient. We've had a rough week, he said. The landlord changed the locks. We're kind of between places right now. Evicted? I asked. He sighed. Yeah, they wouldn't give us another extension. Said we'd already had 2. I didn't say, I told you so, even though the thought crossed my mind. Instead, I said, where are you staying tonight? We're at a motel outside town. Steph's not taking it well. I could picture it, her sitting on the edge of the bed, arms crossed, blaming him for everything. I'd seen that pattern before. Frank, I said, you two need to stop running from the mess and start cleaning it up. I know, he said. That's actually why I'm calling. I want to talk. Just me and you. All right, I said. Tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock. We'll meet at Clyde's Diner. neutral ground. He agreed. That night, I didn't sleep much. Not because I was worried, but because I knew this was a turning point for both of us. When I pulled into the diner the next morning, Frank's car was already there. No sign of Stephanie. He was sitting in a booth by the window, a coffee in front of him, and that same defeated look I'd seen years ago, when he was a kid who'd just broken something he couldn't fix. "Morning, Mom," he said when I sat down. "Morning," I replied. "How's Stephanie?" He gave a tired half-smile. "She stayed at her sister's last night. We needed some space. The waitress came by, poured me a cup of coffee, and left us to it." Frank looked like he hadn't shaved in days. His voice was lower, slower. "I messed up," he said finally. "You were right. About everything." I didn't say anything. Sometimes silence is the only way to let the truth breathe. He went on. "I tried too hard to impress people. Stephanie's parents, her friends. I wanted to show them we weren't struggling. We rented that big apartment to keep up appearances, leased a car we couldn't afford, took out loans thinking we'd make it all back. I thought I could outwork the debt." He shook his head. "Turns out debt works faster than I do." I looked at him carefully. "You've been carrying that for a long time, haven't you?" He nodded. "Yeah, and I dragged her into it. Then I tried to drag you in too. I shouldn't have." For the first time in a long time, I heard humility in his voice. It didn't erase the hurt, but it softened something inside me. "I didn't want you to think I was a failure," he said quietly. "You worked so hard, and I wanted to show you I could make it too." I took a sip of coffee. "Frank, failing isn't the problem. Staying blind to it is." He looked up, eyes wet. "You raised me to work hard." "I did," I said. "Then it's time you remember how." He nodded slowly, wiping his face with the back of his hand. "I don't expect you to fix this for me," he said. "I just needed to own it, to tell you I'm sorry." I leaned forward. Apology accepted. "Now, what's your plan?" He looked surprised. "My plan?" "Yes," I said. "An apology means nothing without action. What are you going to do next?" He hesitated. "I've been applying for sales jobs, but my credit's hurting me. No one wants to hire someone who looks risky on paper." I thought for a moment. "I know someone who manages the hardware store in town, Gary Wilson. You remember him? His son played baseball with you in high school. He's been looking for someone reliable in sales. It's not glamorous, but it's steady. I'll give him a call. Tell him you'll show up Monday morning at 8 sharp." Frank blinked. "You'd do that for me?" "I'm not handing you money," I said. "I'm giving you a door. You have to walk through it yourself." He nodded. "That's fair. I'll also give you a notebook," I said. "Use it to write every expense, every payment, every debt. You can't fix what you won't look at. That's how I kept Stitch and Thread alive. You track every penny until the numbers start working for you again." Frank smiled faintly. "You never really stop being a teacher, do you?" "I never was one," I said. "I just paid attention." He laughed, and for the first time in years, it sounded genuine. "Mom," he said after a while, "I know I can't ask for forgiveness right away, but I'm going to earn it." "You don't have to earn my forgiveness," I said. "You already have it. What you need to earn back is trust." He looked down at the table, nodding. "Fair enough." We sat there for a few minutes, neither of us talking, both of us watching the waitress refill coffee cups around the room. Life goes on, even in the middle of reckonings. When the check came, Frank reached for it first. "Let me, please," he said. "It's the least I can do." I let him. As we stood outside, I handed him a slip of paper with Gary Wilson's number and address. "Don't make me regret this call," I said. "You won't," he promised. "I'll show up Monday, on time." "Good," I said. "And Frank, remember, success isn't about showing off. It's about showing up." He smiled, small but real. You always did know how to say things plain. He turned toward his car, then stopped and looked back. Thanks, Mom. For meeting me. For listening. For not giving up on me. I never stopped being your mother, I said. He nodded, then got into the car and drove away. As I watched him pull onto the main road, I realized how different this goodbye felt from the last one. There was no bitterness this time, just a quiet understanding. For the first time in years, my son had thanked me, and that meant more than any check ever could. After that morning at the diner, I felt something inside me settle. It wasn't happiness exactly, but peace. The kind that comes when you've done the right thing, even if it cost you comfort. I'd forgiven Frank before, but this time it was different. This time, I forgave him without handing over the keys to my life. Forgiveness doesn't mean you forget what someone did. It means you stop letting it drain you, but it's not a free pass either. It's not a key to my savings account, my peace, or my home. A few days later, I went into town to see Mr. Lewis at the bank. He smiled when he saw me. Ruby, what brings you in today? I need to make a few updates. I told him. I moved part of my savings into a separate account, one only I could access. I had the house deed placed securely in my name alone, no joint signatures, no loose ends. Then I asked him to print a statement and tuck it into my records, just for my peace of mind. When I left, I felt lighter. It wasn't about mistrust anymore. It was about protection. I had worked too many years to let guilt undo what discipline built. That same afternoon, I stopped by Nicole's shop, my old shop, Ruby's Stitch and Thread. She'd hung a sign in the window that read Community Sewing Fund, donations welcome. She told me she'd started it to teach local kids how to sew and fix clothes instead of tossing them away. That made me smile. That's a good idea, I said. Nicole shrugged. I figured it's what you would have done. Before I left, I wrote her a check to help expand the program. Put it toward fabric and supplies. I told her, if young people learn to make something with their hands, they'll never feel helpless. That donation felt better than any handout ever could. It wasn't about money. It was about passing on what mattered. Back home, I called my attorney, Mrs. Jenkins, and asked her to update my will. We'd done it years ago, but life changes, and so do lessons. I told her exactly what I wanted. Frank will have his portion, I said, but it will come with conditions. College funds for future grandchildren, if there are any, and the rest donated to the Community Sewing Fund. Mrs. Jenkins smiled. You're wise to make it clear. I'm not trying to punish anyone, I said. I just want things handled with purpose, not entitlement. That night, I made myself a cup of tea and sat by the window. The house was quiet again, peaceful in a way I hadn't felt since before Frank showed up. The air felt clean, the kind of clean that comes from closing a door that needed to be shut. A week later, Frank called to tell me he'd gotten the job at the hardware store. It's not much, he said, but it's something. It's honest work. I told him. That's more than most people can say. He came by the house a few weeks later, just for coffee. No talk of money, no hints or guilt. He brought a small toolbox as a gift. For small repairs, he said. Figured you might need it. It was the first time in years he'd brought me something that wasn't a problem. We sat at the same kitchen table where we'd argued before. This time, the conversation was easy. We talked about weather, neighbors, and how the town was changing. It wasn't emotional or dramatic. It was simple, human, normal. Before he left, he looked at me and said, Mom, I'm learning. Slowly, but I'm learning. I know you are, I said. That's all I ever wanted. He hugged me, awkward like he didn't know if it was allowed. And I let him. Not everything needed fixing in one day. Stephanie never called. Not once. I heard from a friend in Nashville that she'd moved back in with her parents for a while. Maybe she blamed me, maybe she didn't. I didn't waste time wondering. I'd learned that peace doesn't depend on other people's apologies. Sometimes you forgive in silence, because saying it out loud won't change a thing. A few months later, Frank called again to tell me he'd gotten promoted to assistant manager. "It feels good, Mom," he said. "Feels good to be earning something again." "I'm proud of you," I said. "See what happens when you start where you are." He laughed quietly. "Yeah, you were right." It was strange hearing that after all these years, but it warmed me more than I expected. We talked once a week after that. Short calls, real conversation. Not about money, not about blame, just about life. Sometimes he'd drive down on Sundays to mow the lawn or fix something small around the house. I'd make him lunch, and we'd sit on the porch afterward, talking like two adults instead of a mother and a child at war. He didn't move back in. I didn't offer. We found a new balance, respectful, calm, independent. He no longer saw me as a wallet, and I no longer felt like a safety net waiting to break. I never told him how much that meant to me, but I think he knew. When I look back now, I see how everything unfolded exactly as it needed to. The hard part wasn't teaching him about money. It was teaching myself that love doesn't mean losing boundaries. Forgiving Frank didn't mean opening my doors wide again. It meant leaving them unlocked for when he learned to knock. Sometimes love means closing the door gently and waiting until they learn to knock. It's been almost a year since that knock on my porch changed everything. Sometimes I still catch myself thinking about that morning, Frank standing there with his suitcases, that look of confidence that comes when people think they've already won. But I also remember how it ended, me standing in the same doorway, calm and steady, watching them drive away. I sit on that same porch most evenings now. The sun dips behind the oak tree, the dog lies at my feet, and the air feels easy again. The kind of peace you only get when you finally draw a line and stand on the right side of it. If there's one thing this whole experience taught me, it's that boundaries aren't walls, they're doors with locks that you control. And no matter how old you are, you have every right to keep them closed until the person on the other side learns to knock properly. For a long time, I believed that being a good mother meant giving until it hurt. I thought love meant sacrifice, even when the sacrifice didn't make sense. But the truth is, love without boundaries isn't love, it's exhaustion. I learned that helping grown children doesn't always help them grow. Sometimes it just teaches them that someone will always clean up the mess. And when that someone is you, they never learn responsibility. I don't regret standing my ground. I don't regret saying no. What I would have regretted is giving in and losing my peace, the one thing I earned the hard way. When you reach my age, people like to assume you're soft. They think time wears you down, that you'll give in just to avoid conflict. But I've learned that age doesn't make you weaker. It sharpens your wisdom. It makes you see patterns quicker and lies faster. Frank still calls every week. He's doing better. He's learning what it means to rebuild step by step. I can hear pride in his voice again. Not the showy kind, but the quiet kind that comes when you earn your way. Stephanie, well, she still keeps her distance. I can't say I'm surprised. Maybe one day she'll see things differently. But I'm not waiting on that apology anymore. Sometimes peace comes not from mending every relationship, but from letting some stay broken. I forgave them both, but I didn't reopen the door. Forgiveness isn't a key, it's just a release. It means I stopped carrying what wasn't mine to fix. These days, my life is simple again. I still volunteer at the sewing fund a few times a week. Seeing those young girls thread needles and make their first straight stitch reminds me why I loved that little shop so much. There's pride in creating something from nothing. I tell them, sewing's a lot like living. You take what's torn and you make it stronger at the seams. Sometimes I see older women stop by too. They tell me stories about their children, the ones who take advantage, the ones who don't call unless they need something. I listen, and I tell them the same thing I had to tell myself. It's not selfish to protect what you earned. You worked for decades. You saved when others spent. You gave when you didn't have much to give. You're not greedy for wanting peace now. You're just done financing other people's lessons. And if saying no makes you the villain in their story for a while, let them tell it that way. The truth always comes out in time. One afternoon, I sat on the porch and thought about the younger me, the woman who used to say yes to everything just to keep the peace. I wish I could go back and tell her that peace bought with guilt never lasts, that it's okay to close a door when the person on the other side only wants what's behind you, not who you are. These past months have reminded me what I value: my independence, my dignity, and my rest. Not one of those things is for sale. I also learned that standing firm doesn't mean you stop loving someone. I never stopped loving Frank. I just stopped funding his mistakes. There's a difference. He's earning back trust now, not through words, but through effort. And every time he calls just to ask how I'm doing, without a single mention of money, I thank God for small steps. Sometimes that's all it takes to rebuild something honest. Life has a funny way of testing us in seasons we thought would be easy. I thought my later years would be simple, just gardening, sewing, and quiet mornings. But peace isn't given, it's maintained. You have to guard it like a home you worked decades to build. To every woman listening to this who's ever felt used, pressured, or guilt by her own family, hear me clearly. You are not selfish for saying no. You are not cruel for setting boundaries. You are wise for knowing when to protect yourself. If your children truly love you, they'll learn to respect those boundaries in time. And if they don't, that's their lesson to learn, not your burden to carry. Looking back now, I can say one thing for certain: standing up for myself didn't break my family, it reshaped it. Frank came back to me as a man instead of a child. That wouldn't have happened if I'd kept rescuing him. So, yes, I still sit on this porch, the same one where it all began. The difference is that now, when the doorbell rings, I answer it with a steady heart and clear eyes, because I know the value of what's inside this house. And it's not just the money, it's peace. And sometimes that's worth more than gold. If this story reminds you of your own family, I'd love to know. Have you ever had to draw a line with someone you love? How did it turn out? What would you have done if it were your child standing there? Would you open your door or your eyes first? If you felt something from my story, don't forget to like, share, and comment below. Your voice helps more people find stories like this. Stories that remind us that strength doesn't come from shouting, it comes from standing firm. And if you've ever had to choose between peace and pleasing others, I hope you always choose peace. Because in the end, peace is the real inheritance we leave behind.